Hey, welcome back to the Wednesday night Bible study. We are calling this series the Hall of Faith. This is our fifth installment. Uh, we're going to be looking in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8 through 10, and then Genesis also. Okay, let's get this thing going now. That should work. Okay. So this is going to be about two characters, Abraham and Sarah. We're continuing to look at men and women from the Old Testament. And as for which ones, we're looking at Hebrews chapter 11, often called the Hall of Faith. With suffering and backsliding going on among the Hebrew Christians, a focus on faith was needed. This author of Hebrews gave several examples of people of faith, and this is all in chapter 11. Recall the first couple of verses in chapter 11. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. These ancients are who we're looking at. I put this list up a few weeks ago, coming from Hebrews chapter 11. We have Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, etc., etc. We are going through the list here. Abel, Enoch, and Noah we discussed 2 weeks ago and last week. Now we'll look at Abraham and Sarah. Okay. Feel free to look back there about Enoch and Noah by looking at last week's installment. Now, Abraham and Sarah, or a husband and wife, and those of you who have caught earlier Wednesday night Bible studies have already looked at their story. And we've already taken a look at these two folks, especially Abraham. It was a series on Abraham. But today, we're going to focus on what makes these two characters, Abraham and Sarah, candidates as examples of faith. A husband and wife, very famous couple, and who are they to you and me? Who is Abraham and Sarah to you and me? Well, they're the patriarch and the matriarch of Israel. We are their spiritual descendants. Think about that. We're their spiritual descendants. Abraham was the father of all who believe. Abraham does come up in the New Testament in several places. I'm looking at, for Paul, in Romans chapter 4. Where is that? Come on. There we go. Verse 16. The promise comes by faith so that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring. That includes us. Not only those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all. And then we also have Paul saying in Galatians chapter 3. Why is this running so slowly? Come on. Something's going on. Understand then that those who believe are children of Abraham. The scripture foresaw that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, that's us, and announce the gospel in advance to Abraham. Quote, all nations will be blessed through you. So those who have faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. These two passages, written by the Apostle Paul, tie Abraham in with faith. Today we'll look at the writer of Hebrews' discussion of a point in Abraham and Sarah's life which shows how faith enabled them to do the extraordinary. And then we'll look at other points of their faith in next time. This first one is where their lives of faith all started. And I look at this as a good example of faith when you don't know where God's taking you. In Hebrews, verse 8, chapter 11. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were the heirs with him of the same promise. So let's look at verse 8 a little bit more closely. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. How does this mesh up with this story in Genesis chapter 12? Genesis 12, verse 1. The Lord had said to Abram, now Abram was his name until the God changed his name. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So in verse 2 and 3, we see 7 promises God made to Abraham. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make you a great name. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse whoever curses you. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Nice promises. But I got to thinking, what would I want to hear if I were Abraham? I'd want to hear about Canaan. I would want a more immediate description of where I was going. God doesn't give any motivation to where Abraham was going. No land of milk and honey, nor streets lined with gold. No attractive account of Canaan at all. So if I were Abraham, what would I have thought? And I'd be thinking that I'd be living in tents and be a stranger. Abraham is now youngster. He's 75 years old with a wife and creature comforts at home. But he's told to leave it all, with nothing bad going on to induce him to leave. What was Abraham's response, though? A man of faith. Right there. So Abram left. He left. So Abram left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. So he obeyed and went. Not unlike Noah from last week. God says it, Noah did it. God says it, Abram did it. And it's inconceivable just to imagine that. No U-Hauls back in those days, no air-conditioned cars, no GPS or anything like that. By faith, Abram, when called to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. He didn't know where or what it would be like. That takes some faith. I'm not so sure I could do it. He had that confidence and certainty and trust in God. That word, no, even though he did not know where he was going, that no is a Greek word for to put one's attention to fix one's thoughts on. The faith of Abram was so great, he was not concerned. He could be translated as he went, not troubling his mind as to where he was going. There's a translation like that. He went on, not troubling his mind as to where he was going. That is faith. Looking at the next verse, verse 9, which we read, by faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. I'm going to turn to another person who wrote about Abraham by then, and that's Stephen. I bet a lot of you know about Stephen being the first martyr from the New Testament, who was stoned, and he gave a big long testimony before he was stoned to death. He was the first one, first Christian or believer in Jesus to lose his life. In Acts chapter 7, verse 2, it begins in verse 1. Then the high priest asked him, are these charges true? To this he, Stephen, replied, brothers and fathers, listen to me. And then here we go. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham while he was still in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran. Leave your country and your people, God said, and go to the land I will show you. So he left the land of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran. After the death of his father, God sent him to this land where you are now living. So a little history here. Stephen giving the facts that Abraham was told by God to do all this while he was still in Mesopotamia, which was called Ur, even before he moved to Haran, which is a little area. He then lived in Haran until his father died and then headed for Canaan. A lesson here, the reason I'm bringing that up is that things may happen in stages with God's plans. And that was in stages for Abraham, that it wasn't all done immediately. Maybe God knew it wasn't time yet. So the next verse of Stephen's speech, in verse 5, he gave him no inheritance. He gave Abraham no inheritance here in Canaan, not even a foot of ground. So there's some crazy circumstances. As it said in Hebrews 11, verse 9, he made his home like a stranger in a foreign country. He didn't have a foot of ground to his name. And what about this inheritance from God? He had no inheritance but a promise. And that promise was but God promised him that he and his descendants after him would possess the land, even though at that time Abraham had no child. Stephen continues in Acts. God spoke to him in this way: your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, God said, and afterward they will come out of that country and worship me in this place. So here's a kind of a mixture of good and bad promises. You and your descendants will possess the land, but you're 5 years old with no kids. Oh, and by the way, your descendants will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. So, living like a stranger, no land, some talk of future possession, 400 years of trouble. It might have been hard. Wouldn't it have been hard knowing not what was coming ahead and knowing what you had left behind? Why not pick up your tents and go back? Hebrews 11 verse 10 helps answer that. For Abraham was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. He wasn't focusing on the heat. He wasn't focusing on the sand or the tents. His mind was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Maybe Abraham's mind was on that described in Hebrews chapter 12. The author writes in the next chapter, verse 22 through 24, but you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. This might have been what Abraham was thinking about. You have come to God, the judge of all men, to the spirits of righteousness, men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Now, it is true that Abraham did not know all of this was in the future, but he did have a promise that there would be prospering going on. And we today know there's a lot to this. Like the Hebrew Christians in the readers of this letter, they knew about Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant. And we know even more than those folks, because we read in Revelation chapter 21, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. If Abraham only knew just the wonders that were ahead for all those who believe in God. We'll stop here. You might be wondering, what about Sarah? I said Abraham and Sarah. First, keep in mind what happened to Abraham also happened to Sarah. And we'll look at Sarah's faith specifically next week. So today we studied a time in their life where faith was shown. Next time we'll look at a couple other times in their lives from Hebrews 11 where their faith is displayed. So, in the meantime, take care and may the Lord be with you.